This is a live video. If you have any questions, go ahead, type them in, and when we get to the period questions, we will either take them from the audience here present or from the YouTube and Facebook. It's also a podcast, so we should turn the podcast on. Hello everyone, this is the Atlantis and Lemuria talk. So, during this talk, I plan on explaining the evolution of the planet, because Atlantis and Lemuria just sprout out of nowhere. And so we'll start with the fact that the planet was a gas form, and then eventually evolved into a material form, which eventually became denser and denser to what we actually know today. Then we will see what the differences are between Atlantis and Lemuria, how they were created, what was their original purpose, how they coexisted for a while. They did coexist for a while. And then what happened with the destruction of Lemuria and Atlantis. The effects that has on our lives, and how we can see the remnant of those two societies in our lives today, in this world today. So in the beginning, a lot of you who know me know that I often speak of Cryon. Cryon is an angel that is being channeled through a guy named Lee Carroll. If you've never heard of him, it's a magnificent gentleman who does a lot of work for the planet and for Lemuria energy on the planet. He says that life, as we know, plants, microbes and things, have started as much as 10.5 million years ago. That's how long in the process that it took. But he says that in our cases, as human beings, it's only worth to look back at the information no older than 100,000 years old. Why is that? Before that time, we weren't really in a physical form. We were more in a more astral ether form. And so the challenges that they faced is no longer the challenges that we face, right? There was an evolution that took place. With Lemuria, we will start with their main belief. And in the beginning, these beliefs have been passed down, and we're going to see today through the talk. I'm going to talk about several references that do speak of Lemuria and Atlantis. So not all of this information was downloaded by me. This information has been received by several people throughout the last 100 years, and they have tried to bring this information into the world. And they were often called fools and crazy people. And however, not knowing each other, they were saying the same thing, and we continue to say the same things. And so, in my experience, when everybody can agree on the same facts, it's because they are the reality of what is true. And what has been added on as after that is the superfluous information that we add because of our culture or the location where we live, because we don't understand how these things could have maybe been possible. So we're trying to find a logical explanation based on the experience that we're having today. So this belief, and I'll read it because it comes from one of the readings, was that there was only one consciousness, one spirit, one force, a single oneness. And this is the basis of Lemuria. Encompassed in one was the energy that would bind later together all things, all life, all thoughts, all beings. Out of that, we can say that this is the quantum energy that you are all made of, that all plants and all beings are made of. Everything that we touch is made of molecules. Inside of those molecules is the space, and the space occupying between this molecule is quantum energy. Now, we're lucky to live in a day and age where we can scientifically actually prove this, whereas just a few hundred years ago, shamans were called fools by, conquerors, saying, you're savages, we're civilized, and you don't know anything, when they already knew this. Now, out of loneliness, the one spirit began to move within himself, and luminosity until the light became color. So if you go back to those of you who are Jewish history background or Christian, in the Bible it does say that in the beginning there was the Word. And then from the Word came the 7 days of creation. But this is also the basis of creation in Lemurian times. And so out of his loneliness he created the universe, and within the universe he created worlds and within worlds, dimensions within dimension. But still, this creator remains the only spirit, the one law, and that set it all in motion. And that this creation is like a symphony. It is supposed to be harmonious. The first stage on the planet Earth was the cycle of evolution, where we were mastering our etheric bodies. Etheric bodies are made of ether, hence the name, which means that they're not in a solid form. At the same time was when the first seed of humanity was born. This theory of this gaseous form is formed in Cryon books and a person called Tanis Helliwell's books. It's also the theosophical theories, and this gentleman is from Germany. So there's people about the planet that are from different countries that don't know each other, and they're all agreeing on this fact, that the second age would be Hyperborea. Hyperborea for the Greek was the time of the Titans, of the huge creatures that could harness the elements of nature. They could harness water, they could harness fire, they could start volcanoes. They were that powerful. The ancient Celt referred to these as also the Hyperboreans, as being giants. Now, from one culture to another, the Greeks made the giants, 10,000 feet tall. The Celts made them maybe 10 feet tall. Now, we know today that it's not completely impossible, because if you watch a basketball game, once in a while there's a guy who's 7 or 8 feet tall, and you're like, oh my gosh. He's an oddity now in our world, because that's not the average size of a human. But it was possible to reach these heights and these statures back then. The Egyptians spoke of a land called Punt, and in this land, which was their mythical Eden, where we all started from, the original landmass. Now, in science, for those of you who studied geology, you know that the theories say that before the tectonic plates movement started and we created continent, we were one large mass, right? Now, the Egyptians spoke of these, and it was located near the equator line, so it was a more tropical land, very, very much a land where you could walk around naked or just about, and you could eat by plucking fruits, and there was no cold, there was no shelter. You could be just out and about and be fine. So for the Greeks, like I said, it was the Titans, and other theorists say that what happens to the Titans is that they were living in a more gaseous planet. It was covered by mist. And if we go back to the Celts, all of their fairies, all of their Duen Nadan people were living as part of the mist. And when the mists dissipated on the planet, they had to go underground. They could no longer face the heat of the sun, warming the planet and making the planet see-through, I guess, or transforming the atmosphere into a more clear atmosphere. So there was no sun protection anymore. So those beings entered the earth, and they are now the evolved descendants live into the inner earth, and we'll talk about those at the end of the talk. They live. Some of them live actually in Mount Shasta, which is who we visit when we go there in August this summer. Now the third cycle is the Lemurian cycle. In Lemuria, emerged from the landmass. Now this big landmass, for some people, was called the Gondwana land. And this Gondwana land, after disruption and the pole shift. Now we know that the planet's pole is off kilter. And when this happened, this created a lot of stress in the Earth's crust, and it divided in several landmasses. One of those landmasses became Lemuria. The Lemurians, according to our references were concerned with emotional body development. Now, there's 5 bodies, okay? We have the etheric body that they developed in the Second Age. And then they have the emotional body that they will develop during the Lemurian Age. And then we will develop the mental body through the Atlantean Age. And to eventually developing our physical body. Physical body comes much later. And then we have the spiritual body, of course, which is the first one. The Lemurian and Lemur civilization began about 200,000 years ago and developed into about 100,000 years ago when it was nice and set into its development. It was truly a paradise. The souls were free to enter and leave bodies as well. So we weren't stuck in what we seem to be stuck in now, in the cycle of birth, live, die. They came, experienced, and freed the body and recreated a different body to live in a different experience. The ability, because their bodies weren't as physical as ours, they had the ability to pull out of the air the atoms they needed to create to what they needed. It was a very peaceful existence. They're very quiet people, and they would look alike, if I have an image to give you, very much like the native tribes in North America. Living one with nature, not cutting down forests, but living as a part of the forest or the mountains, like the Incas did, cutting out a rock and not destroying the mountain, but accessing the forces of the land that surrounded them and living with them as one. They were intensely spiritual, and they have no interest in technology whatsoever. All of these theories include the fact that we were visited by beings from other planets. Now, if that interests you, that's the talk on the universe. So that's a whole different talk. But we were part of a much, much greater group. Now, if you think Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry was excellent at explaining how that would look. There was a federation of planets. And we were visiting each other. And we'd come on here, just like as a vacation, just like they do on the Star Trek show, and come for an experience, an evolution, right? Now, eventually, they were living this experience, and they wanted to live it without access to technology. But they had access to it should they wish to. Edgar Cayce said that, for those of you who don't know Edgar Cayce, he was a man from Kentucky who was called the Sleeping Prophet. The Sleeping Prophet would talk in his sleep every afternoon when people would ask him questions. This started to, he had no medical knowledge, he was a strong Christian, he read the Bible all the time, so for him this was not anything that was part of his upbringing whatsoever. It just happened to this poor man, which was devastating too at first, but then people would ask medical questions, and he would actually give them homemade remedies that he could heal from. People could heal from these remedies, and so people would start to hear about this and made the paper. People started writing letters in, and they would ask all these questions, and he would answer. However, interestingly enough, in some of the readings, he started talking about past lives and how we carry disease or karma from past lives, and that's why some of the autoimmune disease that we carry nowadays that don't seem to have a rhyme or reason or explanation cannot be cured by just a remedy, but more by the soul's healing. And so what he had to say about Lemuria is that it was considered the motherland, as opposed to Atlantis, who was considered the fatherland. And as the motherland, each race, there's 5 root races that were seeded on Earth to allow the beginning of the creation of human. These 5 seeds started the 5 root races, which were red, white, black, brown, and yellow. Now we can understand pretty easily what those look like, because they're still here today. We still have those 5 roots. Of course, we're mixing them up a lot more now, but we still can picture what that would look like. And so therefore, there wasn't just one Adam and Eve. Okay? Now, the Lemurian were less aggressive, they were more intuitive, very artistic, very creative, and they live in an emotional state. So they express their artistic side and their emotional all linked together with their emotions and their art. The Atlantean that coexisted with Lemurian for a long period were the ones interested in technology and science. And that's one of the main differences that we have. So Casey talked very little about Lemuria, and why he says, first of all, he's pulling all this information out of the collective consciousness called the Akashic Record. Okay, and in one of his readings, he says the physical being had in Lemuria had the union of sex in one body. Now, when he spoke, Casey, you needed kind of an interpretation a little bit sometimes because it seemed ambiguous. But think about this for a second. The physical being, the body, had the union of sex in one body. What could that mean?
It's man and woman.
Men and women. They were androgynous. They had both sex. They carried both seeds in one body. And that was perfectly normal because your soul is androgynous. And he says of the Lemurians that they were very virtuous as spiritual beings. And so they incurred a lot less soul death and were subsequently freer from soul cleansing round of birth rebirth. If you didn't accumulate all the karma, you didn't need so much rebirth. Yeah? Or your rebirths happen in a different cycle. You can recreate karma later on. But as Lemurians, because they were very spiritual, they were very much aligned with their purpose, so they didn't create a whole need of reincarnation subsequently. The Lemurians also seeded elsewhere afterwards, and through Edgar Casey, he says that they appeared in the land now known as the Gobi Desert. Interestingly enough, discoveries in the 21st century, now long after Casey said these things, because Casey were dating back to 1944, 1950s, and those even sooner than that, 1920s. And so he didn't know anything that would happen, right? And he was no scientist, he was no scholar. But they did find in the Gobi Desert in the 21st century a cemetery with several hundred Caucasian bodies that were, that's 2004 for those who want the exact date, that were especially struck with advanced state of attire. So the clothing required techniques that they didn't think possible for the people at the time. And they were dressed with jewelry made of several different types of garments. It was different leathers. It was wool, but it was also different threads, right? And they had shoes and slippers, so they weren't barefoot. And when they carbon dated all this, they were shocked to see how old everything was. And they can't explain when they were supposed to be cavemen that they were dressed this way. And then that's sparked another search in the Andes. The Andes is the mountain chain in South America that mostly Peru goes along in South America. And there they found another settlement of Lemuria near the lake of Titicaca and along the Nazca Ridge. They found these in the 1990s, but Edgar Casey had talked about those in 1932. So long after he passed, we are finding the proof of what he was advancing just while he was sleeping on his couch. Which is kind of nice that we're having this talk today and not in the 1920s, because in the 1920s you could all walk out of here shaking your head going, oh, she's lost it. But now we have the scientific proof that they're finding these things in all around the world. Trying to disprove it, they're actually finding it, and then they're forced to change their mind. Another man that was quite influential, was born in 1851 and started writing about Lemuria in the 1920s, was James Churchward. James was a colonel in the army, and he was in charge of the famine relief in India. And while he was working out there, he met a name called REIKI. And this man he befriended over time, and I guess James appeared like an okay kind of guy, and so he started telling James that he was the guardian of the Nahakal Brotherhood. The Nahakal Brotherhood is originally from Lemuria. This brotherhood has kept and preserved the stone tablet of Mu. On this stone tablet is all the information I've been reciting to you guys. These tablets are made with symbols that are found all over the world. Even in North America, with the natives in British Columbia. The sun with the 7 triangle is a symbol that is also found on the tablet. This brotherhood has created schools around the world. It's the White Brotherhood, for those of you who know these secret society and mystery schools. They were the Essenes in the deserts. They were the Qatar in Spain. All of these societies are teaching the White Brotherhood's secrets. The White Brotherhood's secrets are Lemurian secrets. We're going to get into those secrets in a minute. Because they're not secrets anymore, which is the beauty of it all. But he got a chance to observe all the tablets, and because he was a bit of a scientific and an inventor, he managed to repair the clay tablets to make sure they wouldn't break down, but he wasn't allowed to take pictures of them. He wasn't allowed to, but he kept drawings, he would put a paper over it, and he would rubbing, exactly, of the tablets. So he kept the file of the rubbings, and he was taught by Rishi how to interpret the symbols and what the meanings of all these tablets were. Now, the Nakal Brotherhood started 70,000 years ago. So we know that Lemuria civilization started to get more concrete about 100,000 years ago, and the Brotherhood started in 70,000 years ago. They tell us that they trained in Mu, and they were training the different colonies all over the world. And their welcoming statement at the door, while you walked into the door, was this: everyone is welcome, be prince or slave. Directly you pass into the temple, you are equals, for they stand in the presence of the Heavenly Father, the Father of them all. And here they are becoming brothers. No payment is charged, all was free. So these teachings were meant for absolutely everyone who was ready and willing to come and study with them. The priesthood is known as the mystery schools, but in Orient is also called the books of the Golden Age. So depending on where you are in the world, these books have different names, these schools have different names, but they are all originally in the Hakal from Lemuria. After that, James Churchward started to study a lot of the things from the Gobi Desert and started traveling to Samoa Islands. And the Samoa Islands are part of Lemuria. And he started meeting a lot of the priests in Hawaii, the kahunas, the holder of the 7 spiritual laws. And eventually he heard of this man called William Niven, who was digging up a secret city in Mexico. The secret city, they found tablets that they know to be, and at the time they couldn't test any further than 12,000 years old. So they knew they were more than that. And again, it's throwing the theory of evolution and everything else for a loop, because they're like, we don't understand. They shouldn't have been written language from that time. This city, they had to dig 10 feet of earth to find the first road. They found the road, but they couldn't find any evidence of civilization, so they kept digging for another 14 feet. And after digging an additional 6 feet, down to 30 feet below, they found volcanic ashes. And then, just like in Pompeii, they kept digging, and they found an entire buried city. And this one carbon dated between 30,000 and 60,000 years old, which is the time of Lemuria. And so they then found the tablets. James Churchward went over and he compared the tablets he had found in India with the tablets that he found in Mexico, and they were the They also found in the sacred big buried city in Mexico things that looked like Chinese artifacts. They found replicas of the Easter Island statues. So imagine yourself, you know, we go to Egypt nowadays and we bring back a little sphinx, you know, and we put that on our shelf. Well, in the houses and the dwellings in this buried city, they had souvenirs from around the world, meaning that they traveled, that they exchange and commerce in between those different lands. And, you know, it wasn't skulls or anything, it was pottery. So you imagine that that was a decorative item, therefore, it was something that they enjoyed and brought back as a souvenir. At least that's the theory that Niven stated. There was Chinese tablets found, with Chinese writing on some of the houses. And they found a forge which could compete with nowadays' ability to forge gold and precious metal. They were very, very advanced in their techniques, in their building. I mean, the building withstood the actual burning of the ashes and 30 feet of earth. So think about it, the amount of weight should have crumbled everything, especially from, this has been happening some 30,000 years ago. And yet the city is still standing under all this ash and rock and rumble. So now we're going to come back to the future and we're going to talk about Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine was one of the first persons that actually began to be outspoken about extraterrestrial, about Lemuria and about Atlantis, about past lives, about introducing philosophical concept and spiritual concept from the East into the American. And some of them celebrated her, and some others just, you know, wanted to send her to another pyre of fire and burn her at the stake. But Shirley, in her book, The Camino, she speaks of one of her recall of one of her past life in Lemuria. And she describes a very important point and singularities about living in Lemuria. She talks about the food. One of the main food that they ate in Lemuria was mango. And they said that it was the closest thing in the third dimension that resembled the, yeah, you didn't know that.
I did not.
That resembles the balanced properties of yin and yang energy. And interestingly enough, nowadays, in 2019 now, we have the medical medium, Anthony Williams, who recommends that you eat 2 cups of mango every morning. Now, did he know that from reading Shirley MacLaine's book? I don't think so. I think that the information is being provided to us by different people so that most of us can access the information one way or another. Because the people that Anthony Williams reaches is not the same kind of people that Shirley MacLaine will reach. But eventually, this information will be reached by enough people and by as many people as needed to effect an actual change. She was talking about the buildings in Lemuria. The buildings were made mostly out of crystal, because crystals amplify our vibration. Now, we all understand, hopefully, if not, you'll have to listen to the talk on Akashic Records, but you are made of atom energy. This quantum energy reacts to frequencies. These frequencies are affecting you every day through music, through noise, through light, through meditation, all of these different things. When you're yelling at somebody, you're disrupting not just your vibration, but the entire ripple effect of where you are. You're affecting everybody and everything you touch by being mad or by being happy, by being compassionate or by being mean. So their building structures were made of the crystals. They also had paths lining the earth that were made of crystals. So they were in constant state of higher vibrational energy using the crystals. They also wore crystal diadems on their heads to help amplify their thoughts. But those were good thoughts. Could you just imagine someone who's walking around and is being hateful and has an amplifier of that? They would have been so negative. But in Lemuria, they were helping plants grow. They were helping crystals to seed, crystals, just like a plant, can seed and grow. And so they were using their vibration the second they were up and walking around and walking about to enhance those vibrations in everything and everywhere they went. They were mostly dressed in plain robes. They didn't have fancy clothing. They didn't have different clothing. They also had no shame. They were androgynous, so they all looked the same. So that they were naked or dressed didn't really matter. And they often, when someone birded in a bird chamber, they would all enter this pool where the baby would be born, and they would all be naked. So it was a beautiful time where the bodies were accepted and loved and cherished. Now, the capital city was called Mu. So a lot of times, people think what is Mu, what is Lemuria, but they're the same. One's the capital, one's the continent, right? So they go together. And their religion was, as I said in the beginning, the one God. This one God was God the Father, God the Mother, and the product of the two working together, love. This Trinity, again, is found in every single part of the world. It's in Egypt, it's in Tibet, it's in Hindu, that's a different topic, but still there. And all the buildings made of crystal were built based on the electromagnetic frequencies of the natural forces of the earth. So you didn't just build a house just anywhere. You went for the energy vortex and built there, right? Which is fantastic. When we go to Shasta, California, I take the groups to these different vortexes, and they are able to feel, because the energy is so strong, how does it feel here? And some places are healing energies, as opposed to other places are learning energies, and as opposed to other places are like playing fun energies. And so they build in consequence to what the earth had to offer. They selected carefully all the proper locations. If you go to Peru, everything is built on top of a mountain. And, if you don't like hiking or climbing, it's not the place to go. But the reason for that is they understood the concept of the pinnacle of the energy being amassed at the very point, so it was concentrated there. So they purposely built on the side of the mountain. Everything was always built on a mountain. They cultivated the valley, but they lived on the mountain. But the temples, their ceremonial place, were always at the top, everywhere. Their bodies is interesting because we have the 5 root races, but in Lemuria there were also starseeds. Starseeds are beings from other planets. So I'm sure you've heard of, some people say, oh, I'm from the Pleiades, or I'm from a different planet. And, at that time in Lemuria, the very beginning, it was the case. And so some of them had the violet skin, violet eyes. They looked different than us because they had more starseed in them than unity seed in them. As we concretize our bodies, because this is still an emotional body, and then we're going to go into Lemuria with a more mental body, and then eventually we'll have a physical body. Our physical body is going to take a specific form. But back in Lemuria, the form was not as determined. It wasn't as stringent. It wasn't as confining. It had, in Lemuria, 50 million souls. 50 million souls. So it wasn't as big and as populated as the planet is now. It was a lot less. And one of the reasons for that is because they were androgynous. Okay? And that allowed for a much slower population growth rate, right? Because you were all single parents, basically. You gave birth to the one, and you mentored the one until it was capable of having a child, and then you could go back and have another one. So they couldn't reproduce as fast as we reproduce. Here we have a kid, for 2 years we have another one, for 2 years we have another one. We're not taking the time to raise this one, to let it grow into something, and then we already have another baby, and they didn't operate this way in Lemuria. They took the time to really nurture this soul emotionally into a strong being before they would, and know that they were perfectly evolved enough to be on their own. and then they would go and be able to have another one. Having the process of, I often hear people say some people should need permanent licenses to get children. They have to appear in front of a board to be accepted as parents. Not everyone can just pop a new baby out. They have to be ready. They have to be mature enough and conscientious enough to be able to bring the soul into this body and raise this body and this soul. So it was quite a process. So that the population growth was much less than we have now. And because the body was living in harmony, they were as immortal as they wanted to be. They could live as long as they wanted to be. Again, we go back to the Old Testament, and it says that they lived 900 years, and we're thinking, oh man, they got mixed up in the translation. They didn't get that right. But no, actually, that's the way it was. And the most audited fact in religions all over the world, which is mostly the documented history, but it's so long, so far gone, we actually forget that these things were not myths. They were actually originally part of something. But our world has changed so much from then to now that we think that those were just stories to scare little children or, to inspire us or whatever they were created for. In Lemuria, in one of the books called Althazar, hang on, I have it here. It's coming. Althazar, a fragment of the true history of the planet Earth. They speak of healing people through fragrances of flowers, floral essence. And so we're thinking about nowadays that would be called aromatherapy. They're also using tones, music, frequencies to heal the body. So again, today that would be to resonance magnetic therapies. It could be people using crystal bowls for meditations. We look at Tibetan monks who are using the toning of their voice and the tingshas. You're looking at the drumming of Native Americans. They're using sounds, rhythmic possibilities for people to get rebalanced energetically and rephase their 5 bodies as one. That was the techniques used then in Lemuria. So we're slowly awakening back to this old knowledge that we're finally accepting because now science is supporting it. But we have known this. This has been forgotten, but hopefully, thankfully, not lost. But it's being remembered. The most second important belief that the Lemurians had was the sense of community. Nobody got left behind. Nobody went hungry, nobody went cold, nobody was left alone. One of the reasons for that is they communicated through telepathy. And through their telepathy, they were able to be completely honest and authentic in their communications. So they couldn't lie to one another. And they had no interest in lying to one another. They wanted to work as a single mind. They were like a beehive, if you think of a beehive, right? They all worked together towards the same goal. Everyone was his brother's keeper. And you were responsible for everyone surrounding you all the time. So, eventually, began the cycle of Atlantis. Some Lemurians were interested in technology, and they were not welcome on Lemuria. They couldn't conduct their experiments, they couldn't do what they wanted, so they moved to a different continent, and they went into the Atlantic Ocean, and there was also a solid mass there before, and they established Atlantis there. This is called the fourth cycle, and the Atlantis people started evolving in their mental. They started thinking more, they started developing ideas, and they accepted the help of the aliens to come in and teach them technology. But the problem is that, would you give a child a gun? Now, for those of you that have the video, everybody here is smiling. I'm taking that to no. Why? Why wouldn't we give a kid a gun? Right? Because they don't know how to use it. It's technology, but it's intriguing, but it can have devastating consequences. The Atlanteans started manipulating things using technology they were given and pushing the limits all the time with catastrophic results sometimes. They also did some splicing of DNA and they did experiments in the DNA sequences, creating things that should have never existed. In the Greek mythology, the Atlanteans were the gods. You know, you have the Greeks and they have their gods that live on this Mount Olympus and they're very powerful and very strong and very knowledgeable. Those were the Atlanteans. Out of reach, living in the ocean, but having the ability to come on land and to do things that nobody else seemed to understand because they weren't as evolved. They were evolving at a different rate. We're entering the Greeks. Information about Atlantis comes to us from Plato. Plato got his information from a guy named Solon. Solon went to Egypt into the big Alexandria library that is now unfortunately sank into the ocean and everything got destroyed. But before this happened, Solon came back to Greece between 590 and 5 AD before Christ and stated that the Egyptian record was written what Plato talks about in Timaeus? Yes, Greek, Latin pronunciation. Timaeus? Okay.
Holistically.
So in those records it states that the strong naval forces coming from past the Hercules pillars would come and invade Greece and the surrounding land, taking slaves and taking food and animals and just being superior forces. In this, you can think of the superior forces as being from Atlantis in its later time. Plato admits that the information is actually 9,000 years old while it was recorded. This is the documents that were held in Alexandria. You know, it was the human race, and it's never such a bigger loss than that. But the books that Solon reported back to Plato, so that Plato could write about it, it states that these records are 9,000 years old. But there was a strong naval force that kept invading the land until this force was eventually won the land of Egypt and surrounding areas, and then shortly after, their land was destroyed. That's when Atlantis sank. And so they established themselves in Egypt and in parts of Greece. The survivor of Atlantis went that way. Yes? Okay. Now, can I have a... In Critias, by Plato as well, he speaks of what Atlantis looked like. Atlantis was given to Poseidon. Again, we're going back to the Greek mythology. Now, that Poseidon was a god, or was a very powerful Atlantis human. 1 and 2 for me are the same. And Poseidon has built Atlantis in a form of, Atlantis was a very mountainous area. And so it was built in circular...
We need to pause for a second.
Okay. We'll pause.
I know what to plug in.
That's only live.
They kept saying low battery. Yeah, and it's not doing anything.
Plugged in the wall. Plugged in the...
There we go. There we go. Coming to you live.
Yeah, coming to you live.
So you're probably gonna have to pay some sort of money now to what's that called, that show?
Alex Trebek.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alex, we stole your tune.
I don't know what's going on with it.
Well, just
Not
keep,
doing
can we just
anything.
keep going?
Yep.
Thank you.
We'll keep going.
Okay, so Critias is a book written by Plato, and in here he actually speaks of the dimension of this island. And it was 555 kilometers one way and by 370 kilometers the other way. So it wasn't a humongous piece of land. You know, people imagine they covered the entire Atlantic Ocean, but it wasn't. It wasn't that big. But there, he married this lady, and this lady gave birth to 5 sets of twins. Now, this is introduced by Plato. Now, if we remember what Edgar Cayce had to say, he said that 5 root race were created. Now, interestingly enough, that was for Lemuria. But when you go 9,000 years back, it's possible the information got mingled. It's possible that for the Greeks it was unthinkable that there was a land other than Atlantis. Already believing Atlantis, Plato was chastised and told that this was just a myth and a story to reinforce his theory on the perfect society. So that he would come up and start talking about another civilization that was extremely advanced. He would have been completely ridiculed. But the facts match. They lived on an island, they lived somewhere in the ocean, and they had 5 sets of twins that were obviously back then married to each other. They were androgynous, because, again, the Greeks couldn't think of androgyny as a thing. But there was 5 root race that began from this birth of Poseidon and his wife. Now, the Atlanteans, before they were a warring race at the end, before their destruction, but they were visiting a lot more than just the Egypt lands and the Grecian land. They went and influenced the Celt and also the North American tribes on the Atlantic Ocean and Atlantic coast, all the way down to Mexico and to South America. So if you think of the different cultures, one is more warish like, and the other one is more peaceful like. There's a reason for that, because one was affected and influenced by Lemuria, and the other one was affected and influenced by Atlantis. They also had very different technology. Lemurians' theology was to not affect and influence others beyond their own development. So we're going back to Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry, where there's the one rule. We can visit any world we want, but we cannot interfere with their development, and we cannot give them something they don't already have created. It's none of our business. Maybe they'll never invent it because they're never going to need it. And so we shouldn't introduce something in a society that is not required and needed. The Atlanteans, however, thought they were so much superior, and so wanted to teach and spread the good. And they did, to what you can see in Europe, developed into a very violent civilization. Now, Plato and Edgar Cayce also link up, I said that already. And Cayce on Atlantis says that beneath the Sphinx, there is a hall of records hidden there. Now, I personally went to Egypt, and I personally circled the Sphinx. And at the base of the Sphinx, and the area of the tail, there's something that looks like a window. It's almost buried in the sand, but there's a little square there that doesn't belong there. I'm pretty sure that after Cayce said that, and some people read about it, they went and dug under there, and they did find something. But right now, some people are keeping all that information to themselves, because they're probably hoping to find some kind of, information that give them an advantage or something. They'll be very disappointed, but eventually the information will be revealed. In this book that I said about Althazar, written by Solera, this gentleman also, like Edgar Cayce, pulled the information out of the Akashic Records and explains what's at the bottom of the Sphinx. It's different portals that connect with the different huge central energy of the world, the chakra centers of the planet. And you could travel from one to another through this portal, and different frequencies took you to a different door. So one of them takes you to Easter Island. One of them takes you near Avebury and the Stone Age circles. One of them takes you to Egypt. One of them probably takes you around Tibet as well. And that's how they travel, through these frequency portals. They could do that. not affecting the planet with pollution and creating chaos. And you could easily transport from one place to the other. It was easy. It was simple. Now, Casey says of the Atlanteans that unresolved at the time of their cataclysmic destruction. So when Atlantis was destroyed, and there was 3 cataclysms in Atlantis. There was 2 minor ones and 1 gigantic one that sunk the island in the ocean. Now, this unresolved created bad karma for over millennia of incarnations, inflicting each one into the present lifetime. So, in this state, Edgar Casey says that there cannot be any physical healing without spiritual healing, because the soul is the seat of your being. The Atlanteans had behaved badly, accumulated enormous karmic debt, and needed to several incarnations to correct the course that they had set on. They did coexist for a while, right? Because they originated from Lemuria anyway. So they did coexist for a while, going ahead in their pursuit. Now think of it as you have children, and your children are saying, well, let's go back 100 years. Parents are living on the farm, they've been on the farm for generations. The kids are like, hey, enough of this, I'm going to the city, I'm going to work in the industry, I'm going to make money, you'll see, I'll show you. And off they go to the city, and they work in these big industries, they live in these towns, and the parents are shaking their head, perfectly happy to still be on the farm. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but you know, they're self-sustaining and everything is not going so bad for them. While the children are in the city, and now they're in the pursuit of better lodgings, and better this, and better that, and the accumulation of the huge accumulation of people in the small areas is now making it impossible to build buildings based on the energy. They're just building everywhere they can, building on top of each other, affecting one another, not having the time or the space to actually evolve the way they're supposed to be, because they're in a constant pursuit of something else. The Lemurian had no desire to have pretty things or accumulate things. So if you're wondering about yourself, am I Lemurian or am I Atlantean? Just know that this went on for such a long time that most likely you had incarnations in both. Now, where is your karma set? Then you can see if your soul is more Lemurian and Atlantean in the questions you ask yourself now today. But if your essence is Lemurian, you'll be a minimalist. You won't go for the jewelry or the enhancement. You'll be happy with simple things and simple foods. And you will be happier, closer to nature, or have a need to be regularly in touch with nature. And be spiritually more guided than the pursuit of things, material things. The Lemurian tried to share their spirituality with the Atlanteans, but the Atlanteans had very little interest in that because they felt superior, because they have technology. So this belief that we're better because we're stronger, because we have technology, comes all the way from there. So remember at the beginning of the talk, I said I will show you how we're still affected by these thoughts today. These beliefs stem from that far gone. That if you live one with nature, you're inferior and you're a savage and you're less likely to understand us, right? And if you go and look in the jungles near the Amazon, and you look at the people, how they live in unity, in peace, in their family, everybody has something to eat, everybody has a place to sleep, and yet we're calling them savages. They respect nature, they honor nature, and we come in with our bulldozers and they're cutting down the lung of this planet, but they're a savage, right? This is exactly what has been happening since the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. The Lemurians could not communicate with the Atlanteans because remember, they are talking on a telepathic level, not words, more images and feelings and emotion. So in order to communicate with the Atlanteans, they have to start using words. And the more they did that, the more they lost their ability of using their image and their mind and the telepathy. But this was a common ability, not a gift back then, a common ability that was lost. It's not completely gone. Some people nowadays can still play with those things. But the problem is we don't have enough people to practice with. So you can't really, evolve so much disability. The other thing too is that the Atlanteans were kind of attractive to the younger Lemurians in the sense that they brought pretty things. So go back to when the settlers came and they were exchanging pounds of skins of whatever, wolf skin, beaver skins for a few trinkets and shiny things. But that was the same exact thing that happened in Lemuria. Ooh, look, we don't have that. Oh. And they were artists, and they were creators, and they're like, oh, this could be interesting. We could work with this, right? Not understanding that their appeal is now being drawn into a more physical world and away from more spiritual things. Every time they adopted a technique or something that came from the Atlanteans, they let go of something spiritual that they possessed. And because the Atlanteans didn't value spirituality, whatever the Lemurians had to offer had no value. None whatsoever. So they began to learn the language, they began to travel to Atlantis, and they began to interact with them. And the integration of the culture became an annihilation of a culture. It became a sole Atlantis culture. Those of us who were incarnated in the days of Lemuria, which includes the original starseeds, we struggle because we struggle with that guilt that we knew better and we abandoned that. We're struggling with, what am I doing now? And am I doing a mistake again? Because there's a part of us, a strong part of us, that still remembers this. That we knew better and we let it go for trinkets and for being part of something that looked cool. Now, how many times does this happen in our lives today? Right? We have to be cool, we have to blend in, we have to fit in, we have to be like, we have to have certain furniture or certain clothes or certain hair color or certain hairdo, right? It's so complicated. You're looking at the youths, and the youths are like, they don't even know where to throw themselves. And they think that they have to have something to give them an identity because their own identity is not good enough. So you ask them, who are you? And they're like, I'm goth. I'm like, no, seriously, who are you? Well, can't you tell? I'm like, no, I can tell you dress in black, you wear a lot of eyeliner, and you got nail polish, but it doesn't tell me who you are. Who are you? And they're completely, I work with a lot of young people, they're completely confused by my question. I'm like, that's just an outside exterior. It means nothing because I can throw you in the shower, put different clothes on you, and make you look like a preppy girl. And then does that make you a preppy girl or a mean girl or whatever you want to call them? And I'm like, well, no. I said, okay, but have you spent any time figuring out who you are? Why are you adhering to this group? What does it have that allows you to express something about yourself? But first, why don't you find out who you are? And instead of adhering to a mold and fitting inside of a box. We have to stop thinking of us as boxes and think of us as these expanded spiritual beings full of light, full of potential, and tapping into this light and potential and expressing it in everything that we do, say, and think. So the Lemurian, hang on, I just don't want to miss anything, but the Lemurians are feeling that struggle. And we're the ones that are pioneering this new age, which is called the Aquarian age, this new age of spirituality, of re-embracing us as a whole community, as a whole planet, as being working together to create a better world. Now, in Atlantis, they were using crystals for technology. We're developing this now. Even just 50 years ago, this talk would have sounded insane. You're using crystal for operations and crystals to cut things. And these are things that already existed 30,000 years ago. We forgot about it. And now these Atlantean beings are coming back, and first they started, their reincarnation is so apparent when you're looking at the extraordinary amount of number of people that were born in the last 200 years. How the population of the planet has just gone straight up into an insane amount of number that we don't even know how we're going to sustain if the growth keeps happening. They started with the telegraph, the telephone, the televisions, the radios. All this technology came in. All of a sudden you have all these crazy inventors popping all over the planet, creating airplanes, automobiles, and boats, and motors, and industries, and pollution, and oh my gosh, not ever thinking of the consequences of, maybe we're polluting the planet, maybe we're affecting the sky, and it's the components that compose our oxygen, and maybe we're killing things, and just for the profit of technology, the profit of learning, the profit of curiosity, a very mental body consecration. Okay? The mental, we're nowadays confusing the mental and the emotional. But someone who's depressed doesn't have a mental illness, they have an emotional problem. That's very different things. Someone who has a mental issue is someone who can't learn, who has no creativity, who has no original ideas. That's a mental problem. As someone that can't think, those are mental things. But anything that relates to the emotional realm belongs to the emotional body, not the mental body. So Atlantis, not caring what they were doing, just started spreading everything they were creating. So if you look in the mythology of Egypt, in Egypt there's these gods that come and teach agriculture. Out of nowhere. Poof, this guy appears out of the sky, and he taught us, and they have that in China too. They have that in a lot of countries. These beings, intelligent, supreme, higher than us, gods, came down and taught us how to write. They taught us how to breed stock. One of the examples is that in modern historians cannot comprehend how at the Neolithic period, all of a sudden, agriculture started to exist and they started domesticating animals. That was 11,000 before Christ, right? So in that time, that is when the Atlanteans started to settle in other places because Atlantis was destroyed. And they're coming and they're bringing us knowledge. And, why would they be stupid enough to make the agricultural things themselves? We'll teach you how, and we'll sit on our throne. We'll let you do the work. And you feed us because we're supreme beings. We have knowledge you don't have. And to them, these beings could levitate things. These beings could transport through the air, levitate. And so they appeared godlike to these less informed, less knowledgeable people. If you go to Tibet, you can actually meet with monks who can levitate. That still does exist today. It's not, nothing is completely lost. It's just that the very few are able to access these abilities, but they can still do those things. But back then, they called themselves gods. But they were just people with enhanced abilities. Now, this androgynous being of Lemuria, are you asking yourself, how did we go from being androgynous to being male-female? Well, this happened at one point when Atlantis decided to convince the Lemurians that it would be in their best interest if they did separate. First of all, they would bring a lot more children into the world. Second of all, they would be much more in touch with body, and their bodies, they would need to be with a female and a male together. It would help their emotional body to develop, okay, in order to eventually procreate. And they would be obviously creating this unity of community as they work together. It was meant to enhance our growth, spiritual growth. So they created these machines that literally pulled the yin from the yang. So imagine two papers stuck together, right? They look like they're one, but you're able through this machine to focus all the yin and all the yang into different bodies. And there comes the story from the Bible that says, and man, out of his rib, which is actually the last part that seems to detach in this experiment, out of the rib came Eve. So, if you want to know more about this actual story, you can read The Camino by Shirley MacLaine, and she actually envisions this process happening to her, and she explains how this feels and how this happens. But she is pregnant, and she takes this form out of her, and a new soul appears. This is important because your soul remains androgynous. So your soul has no male-female differentiation. But it's a male-female soul stuck in a one-sided body, which explains a lot of the confusions that some of us have. Okay? And now people are able to express this. Now we're having people go through surgery to try and help them live with this. But there's people throughout history that have felt, I'm a man trapped inside of a woman's body, or I'm a woman trapped into a man's body. This isn't new. And if you ask them if they think they're gay, they're just telling you, I'm not gay per se. I just feel that I should be a woman. So they don't see themselves as gay. But this kind of a little bit explains why that is. Okay? So they did this, and then out of that came the pure state of confusion. What they were hoping for did not happen. Instead, the androgynous soul always kept feeling something was missing. And that poses a huge demand on their partner, because they can't always be making love 24/7. That took them away from their spiritual path as well. And some of them got lost into the sexual part and the sensual pleasures and the earthly pleasures and the body pleasures. And again, everything drove them away from what they were most trying to achieve, and that's enhancing their spiritual growth.
Did the Atlanteans really believe that was what was best?
That's what they came to an agreement between Atlantis and Lemuria, yes. It was, they didn't shove the Lemuria into these tanks unwillingly. They voluntarily thought, yeah, that sounds great, because by then the Lemurians were lured by the Atlanteans' technology, ability, and differentiation, and they did everything faster, and they did everything what seems to be better, and so maybe they could help us get there faster. They bought into it, right? And it's not that far-fetched. Just look at all the ads you can find on the internet and on TV that are selling you can lose weight now. You can do this right away. Buy this product, and you don't have to make any efforts, and everything will be done for you. Just swallow the pills. Right? We get fed those lines all the time. So it shouldn't become don't think that Lemurians were stupid. They were not. But they bought into the lies, because the lie was so big that they believed it. It's not little lies that are easy to swallow. It's when everybody seems to believe it. You're thinking, well, maybe I'm the one that's off. Maybe I'm the one that's, needs some course correction here, because everybody seems to believe it, or, be walking right into that. So, okay, well, everybody's doing it. Oh my gosh, right? I have someone here that said, well, if I didn't need a cell phone, I wouldn't have a cell phone. But nowadays, if you don't have one, people are saying, well, we can't get in touch with you, we couldn't get a hold of you, so we give the job to someone else. And you're like, you can wait until I got home and pick up my answering machine? And they're like, yeah, no, that doesn't work. They think you're weird, right? I do a lot of business with the internet, and sometimes I have people sending me 3 messages. And I'm busy, I have clients. I can't pick up the phone every time it dings. I hate that. And so then at lunchtime, when I stop and I look at my phone, I have these messages. Why aren't you answering to me? Why aren't you talking to me? Why don't you care? I'm like, wow, great. I'm busy. I will get back to you when I can. But, I'm going to age myself. But there was a time where you had to send a letter. And I had to go, and it had to go into this weird little red box, and then this mysterious man would come and pick it up, and then it would take a week, maybe 2, to get there. And then they'd open it, read it, and go, oh, okay. And then they'd reply to you and then put it in a strange red box, and it would take another 2 weeks for you to get an answer. Now you can't wait even an hour for me to finish with my client, for me to answer you. It's insane what we're putting ourselves through. But this comes with technology, right? And this comes from a long, long, long time ago. It's just the reason why it's all coming back now, and this is the key for tonight, please go away with that. It's because they accumulated huge karma, and now they have to clear the karma. But in order to clear karma, you have to reproduce the similar instances and emotional states in order to this time make the right choice. Now, if you want to know about karma, there's a whole entire podcast on karma that's posted, so you can go and have a look at that. But continuing on, after we become men and women, some people develop a sense of superiority, and that's when classes begin. You know, so we have the priests, the kings, the servants, the slaves, and everybody had to be better than someone else, somebody else, and somebody. You didn't want to be at the bottom of the pond, right? And in some castes, it was the color of your skin that determined how you got selected for whatever you did, not your gifts, not your talents, not your abilities. And so it was that's where a lot of the things from ego started and selfishness started. So there was no ego until then. Ego was created out of our pursuits for selfishness, needs, and satisfactions of the physical body. So Atlantis then became a very bitter and violent place, and some people prepared to leave. They knew where this was going. And for those of you out there that know and have read my book, understand that where this story stems from. The book speaks of what I spoke tonight, but it also tells you what happened to these people who actually left and where they went. Okay? That's what this book's about. Because now they had to pull themselves out of Atlantis, they had to pull themselves out of this falling down spiral they were on, and they have to rebuild it and return to Lemuria valleys. Now, these multiple reincarnations happen. We try to grow. Now let's determine if you're Atlantean or Lemurian. Yep, that'll be fun. So, people are like, you don't know that, sure. Atlantean know better, usually. And they think they know, even though they don't know. They always have an answer. You know, even if you're not asking for it, they're always the one giving you the answer. They always have some theory to throw at you. They're very knowledgeable. And they usually don't tend to be spiritual at all. They're very technically gadget-oriented. They like science. It has to be proven through science. And now that science is starting to prove that these things are all real, they're really confused, right? But lucky for them, all the souls can finally pierce through and have a spiritual awareness of consciousness openness happen for them. So it's not too late, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that for them, it's a long road. It's difficult. It's arduous for them. The Lemurians, on the other hand, ask, geez, why did that happen? Did I cause this? Right? They're much more oriented toward the inner world. They're wondering what is their affect into this world, into this community, into their families. They often have a lot of regret about what they did. They always feel like they should have known better, they should have been make better choices. They're very unforgiving toward themselves, but they're full of compassion and love towards everybody else. They want to connect to spirit. They want to connect to the truth. They want a direct line to it. They're tired of feeling alone and disconnected because they know it should be different, and they're looking. So they're the seekers. They're the curious ones. Yeah. And always remember that consciousness can express itself through its own beauty. Right? So if you wanna get in touch with your spirituality, with your higher self and your creator, start looking at how you can start creating something. Start expressing your creativity. That looks like singing or drawing or writing poems or sewing something, or I don't know. Planting a garden is being creative, right? Find your way that belongs to you, that you can connect to these things, to be able to be creative and getting in touch with that part of yourself and let that through the door. And then in the book of Alcazar, it speaks of what happened to Lemuria. Lots of the theories are just being very kind, and they're saying that there's a ring of fire in the ocean, and that was made it unstable, and the tectonic plates exploded, and that's where there's a lot of volcanic area and action in the area, and it just sank. Well, that's the scientific theory. However, in Alcazar, he explains that experiments conducted by Atlanteans with playing with the Mother's core, the Mother Earth's core, through lasers, they voluntarily destroyed Lemuria because it was starting to interfere with them. Lemurians' elders, because they know they lived a long, long, long time, were not being influenced by Atlanteans, and they were starting to realize that what the Atlanteans were doing was becoming a nuisance to the spiritual development of the Lemurians, and they were trying to stop them. And so they were destroyed. And that's how they sank in the ocean. This happened about 30,000 years ago. So if you go back to the Niven tablets that was found in Mexico, in that city buried by ashes, see, it all links at the end of the talk. That's what happened. Lemuria sank. It was huge volcanic activity. Yes, that's true, but that happened because it was caused by Atlantis. But 30,000 years ago is when the first sinking of the continent happened. And it buried all the cities that were along the coast. Now, George Hunt Williamson, also known as Brother Philip, has created he's part of the founding of the Lemurian order in the high Andes and mountains. The settlement, one of the few settlements of active Lemurians that still exist today near Lake Titicaca. He describes that at the time of the cataclysm, Bolivia was on the seashore. Okay, so if you know your geography a little bit, Lake Titicaca is one of the highest lakes in the world. So when this one sank, something else had to come up. And when that came up, it created the Andes. Today, in the Andes, there's a huge body of water trapped in the mountain, salt water. It's very far from the ocean. And they're using this water to make salt. It's called the salt mines. But really, it's just the water they're trickling out into basins, and they're letting the water evaporate, and they're collecting the sea salt from the basins. So it's not unbelievable to think that Bolivia was at sea level, because there's sea water that is trapped in this mountain formation. In order for this to work, you have to be a philosophist, you have to be a scientist, you have to be a spiritual person, you have to be open to reading a lot of different materials, not just one source. But if you're curious enough and you start reading about all these different sources and all this different information, you can actually link it together and actually prove one with the other. Although the other one doesn't know that it's actually proving this. But standing alone, you're just like, oh, it's interesting, there's salt mines in Peru. Okay. And then you read about this, you go, oh, wait on a second. This actually works, right? So the other theory is that hang on, gotta help myself. The other theory is that it was just time for Lemuria to go, and they just dissipated. However, Shirley MacLaine in her book describes a vivid recount of how cataclysmic Lemuria sinking was, and they weren't prepared for it. And so for people being so in touch with Mother Nature and what's going on around them and surrounds them, I find that extremely difficult to believe. It was very sudden and catastrophic and created huge fears in the reincarnated Lemurians, because they were so lost and didn't understand what was happening, that I do tend to believe the theory that it was caused by the Atlanteans. Okay, out of sheer, stupidity, selfishness, and the same reason why we explode bombs today in our world, right? They wanted something, they couldn't have it, and they decided to take it. They couldn't take it, they destroyed it. They went, oh well, and kept moving. Eventually, Atlantis didn't get any better. It only got worse, and their experiment destroyed themselves. It's through their experiment that eventually they sank their own continent. They just went too deep, too far, and just like in the Lord of the Rings, the dwarves created their own demise because they dug too deep and they woke something that shouldn't have never been awoken. Same thing happened to Atlantis. Eventually, it just crumbled. And that was the end of Atlantis, about 15,000 years before Christ, or before now. So 10, 12,000 years before Christ. So if you add the 2,000 years we've lived since, it's about that long. Okay, 1450. But what's 1,000 years at that point, right? The Atlanteans then settled in places like Egypt and Mexico, and you can see the traces of their civilization everywhere where there's pyramids. It's the mark of the Atlanteans. And if you go to
where there's what, sorry?
I'm sorry?
Where there is what?
Where there are pyramids?
Oh, pyramids.
Yeah, it's the trace of the Atlantean civilization. The Lemurians were associated to the Mayas, which populated more the west coast. If you look at just in Canada, because Canada is pretty wide, if you look at the tribes living in the eastern seaboard and the tribes living in the western seaboard, they're very, very different in the way they think and the way their legends are built and the way their cultures is built. They're completely different cultures. Alrighty then. And then finally, the two other authors that speak of Lemuria and Atlantis, if you're interested in your research, is Ignatius Donnelly. He wrote the Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And his theory was that it was when Atlantis sank that it created the huge flood. And I think there was more than one huge flood. I think that when Lemuria sank, there was a huge flood, and I think that when Atlantis sank, that also created a huge flood, but that one was documented in many of the cultures around the world. East Indians have a diluvian story. The Native Americans have a diluvian story. Obviously, the Jewish do, and any Christian who reads the Old Testament therefore knows of the big flood that destroyed everything. So think about it that way. Anything in the Old Testament that happened before the flood meant it happened when Atlantis still existed. That's how far back these books go. But we just lost the concept of the time. But Plato himself said the writings in the Alexandria Library were at least 9,000 years old. They could conceive that then. Why are we such having a hard time conceiving that now? That these writings could be that old, right? And the last one, but not the least, is the Mount Shasta books, written by Aurelia Louise Jones, a Canadian. She's passed away a few years ago, but she wrote the books Telos 1, Telos 2, and Telos 3, and in which she speaks of these survivors of the destruction and who settled under the mountain. So corroborates the knowledge that another person named Talis Eliwell speaks in her book called Decoding Your Destiny, that beings went and hid under the mountains and evolved there in the mountains. And these beings are now taking care of the crystals, alignments of the earth, and helping the human evolution by teaching us and guiding us in evolving and to ascending to a higher dimension, which means, in other words, adjusting our frequency to not being so dense, literally and figuratively, and so in order for us to go up. Okay, so I managed to do that in time, and there's some time for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
That's a lot.
I know.
Yeah, a lot of information.
How did the other species that knew about Atlantis kind of deal with their death and the flood of it? Like that must have been like it must have been a very sudden and unexpected flood for the rest of that population. So did they all die too in the process?
I'm sorry, so your question is how did it
they-
affect the Atlanteans?
No, the people that weren't Atlanteans, the people that
Well,
they
in
came
the
in contact
if
with.
you follow Plato, Plato says it came as a great relief that their land was destroyed and the invaders and the superior race was destroyed. And so without them interfering, then the Greeks became more powerful, right? So they just substituted one civilization after the next, and that's the recorded history. They went from one to the next, never realizing that if they keep falling apart and being destroyed, then that must mean that, maybe you're on the wrong path. Maybe you should try something different.
I've got two questions.
Go ahead.
Where is the exact location of where Atlantis is buried?
Okay, so for those of you present, I can show you the maps. But for Lemuria, it goes from Easter Island to all the Fiji Islands, Samoa Islands, and it goes a little bit higher up. But that's
To
the
Hawaii.
landmass.
Hawaii?
That's the landmass we're talking about. And they were the mountains of the continent that are left from the sinking. Okay? Then on the Atlantic side, you start at the Bimini Islands, and you go into the ocean, and it goes quite far out. It reaches, the Greeks didn't quite know, and that's why they were such a superior naval force, is they could navigate the ocean, right? One of the things that the Vikings had on other populations, and invading and raiding them, was that they could navigate even though they had no sunlight or moonlight, right? They could navigate through the clouds because they knew how. The same way, the people in Atlantis continent could navigate longer distances, and so they were protected from anybody else, but they had the ability to navigate and orient themselves into the other landmasses.
And how is it all helping us now? Like, as
Well-
things are now, we realize there is some things about to happen. I think we all feel it.
It's helping you now because you have to understand the history, because if you don't understand history, history repeats itself. And so what happened to these worlds? Come on, someone
They were
destroyed.
destroyed.
They were destroyed.
Mhm.
And if history repeats itself, what's going to happen?
We'll
We're going to
destroy
destroy ourselves.
ourselves.
And where are we heading if we don't change?
Yeah.
Well, it's very obvious via climate change at the moment.
So that's why it's so important to learn this. And it's not to hate the Atlanteans. It's not that we're better than us. That's what we have to learn. We have to evolve as a group of humans together in a community, helping each other, understanding each other, and understanding that we are etheric being, physical being, emotional being, mental being, and spiritual being. And that all of these are contained in your one envelope that you choose to have right now.
And then the important thing is that we were all just created from oneness. That's where we
Yes,
started.
exactly.
That one
And that's what the talk starts talking about. We are all one. We are all linked. And so if one of us suffer, we all suffer. Now go talk to an empath and ask them what that feels like. And they're going to be the first one to tell you, if I enter a room and someone's in pain, I feel their pain. If someone is sad, I feel their sadness. And there's a lot more of these people being born. They're called indigo children, crystal children, they're called rainbow children. All of these are like this. So therefore, you need to understand all this to help them. And we're not teaching this in school. So your job is to get to know this information and then go home and tell your children, your uncles, your nieces, your parents about this, and awaken them to this knowledge. Your job is to share these talks that are free on whatever social media you're using to get as many people as we can to have this knowledge, right? I could say, okay, well, you have to buy my book, you have to buy this, you have to buy that. I'm not doing that. I'm giving it to you for free. Why? Because it's super important. I really believe in it. And so I'm taking the time to do this. And in order to help as many people as I can. And technology is helping. And that's where I think that we can thank Atlanteans, is that their technology can be misused, and we've seen that over and over. But then there is a purpose that can serve the highest good. And if we can start realigning those energies towards that, then we can create something wonderful. And that's one of the missing links that happened between Atlantis and Lemuria is that Lemuria decided not to get involved. And Atlantis really, really needed Lemurians to be involved to redirect these energies into a positive flow. And this is where us nowadays need to stay, not pull away from it, but stay involved, stay with it, and develop the positive means for change. They need our influence. We need to be constant in our presence, in our consciousness, to make these changes be an occurrence daily, not a miracle. Okay? Anybody else?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the indigo children?
Indigo children, whole lot of talk.
Okay.
That to itself is something I will do later on, but that's 2-hour talk.
Did you mean like the more empathic people? And
Yes, indigos are more empathic. They're extremely sensitive, and they have very little ego, and so can easily be crushed. So that's that. But I promise I will do a talk on indigo, crystal, and rainbow children. But that's a whole.
You're gonna teach us how to raise one? Because I'm pretty sure I've got one.
Yes, I will talk about that in the talk. Yes, promise. Yes.
So your sessions at Mount Shasta,
Yes.
when you visit those certain energy vectors, is there ways to really integrate that?
That's what I teach when you go down there.
Okay. So how much roughly is it, that event?
That event until April 15th, you can get it for $1,300. Right now we're renting a huge house, and so you can stay with us, or you can rent a hotel room and just join us every morning, or we'll pick you up or whatever. It's from August 10 to 17, and just during this entire week, I take you to the different energy vortex. I walk you through what we do there. Everybody gets a chance to enter the vortex, be in the vortex, and change, shift, and evolve, I guess would be the word, with those new vibrations. So when you leave there, you're completely changed. It's very powerful. Yes.
Okay, so just asking, so when the Atlantis, when they're having such a powerful technology, I'm wondering why it didn't affect maybe like other worlds, maybe in the way like how colonization has happened.
Because they didn't have that technology. They were, remember at the very beginning I said they were given technology by aliens, so the aliens didn't share the technology to travel to the other world. They didn't have that.
This is probably a good thing.
So they had way too much power in their hands for what they could handle already, and they just didn't possess. But they had enough to it's if we Chris and I went to Egypt, and in one of the temples, in the all the beams are carved and everything, you can literally see an airplane, a tank, and what looks like a spacecraft. It's completely odd, and it's right along the rest of them, so it wasn't added later on. It's part of that, and I really think that they from what I've seen personally in my visions, they use electromagnetic suspension fields to travel, but that you have to be within a certain distance of the Earth in order to do that. So they could fly, but they couldn't space fly, but they could travel across the planet. Yeah. So they have that ability, but not extraterrestrial travel.
The legends say that they actually tried, and they say that the Babel Tower, you know, the legend of,
Yeah, the Babel
they
Tower.
say that some of the pyramids were built because they did want to influence other worlds.
Oh, they did
want to.
but they didn't
Yes,
succeed.
and they say that that's even that tower's mythology is about that,
Yeah, no,
wanting to do that, but then the extraterrestrials, so it's like,
no, and you have to understand that there's a karmic board that's watching over us. That there are several people who try to be a part of that, and that's a hybrid talk in 3 weeks, right? I'm talking about that, the different extraterrestrial that came here, entered the human evolution, and help us grow as humans and developing bodies, right? They didn't, they weren't so far-fetched into trying to give us guns or anything. but they were trying to help us manifest and things like that. So that's the hybrid talk. So that's another 2-hour talk completely. But there are laws, and there's until very recently there was a thing that preventing others from accessing us and manipulating us, because that did happen. Again, hybrid talk. And after that, we have been protected from non-interference by more advanced civilization. And so therefore, because we were protected from being interfered, we also were impossible for us to get out. Hybrid talk. And that's happening 3 weeks, right?
I think so, yeah.
So sorry, going back to the pyramids, is it true then the aliens have helped to make the pyramids, or they were man-made?
Okay, so the pyramids were made by humans that had enhanced ability to create things and move things with their minds, and did have laser technology. The technology was originally passed from alien to us, but it was us that decided to build those things.
Those were Atlanteans.
Yes, Atlanteans, yeah.
Atlanteans who are the ones who were in Egypt that were
Exactly, yes.
And then you said we were going to find out about the secrets in the book. Are we?
Well, that is the whole talk. That's it.
Oh,
That's it. You are spiritual beings,
Right.
and you are here because you have 5 bodies, and you have to unite those 5 bodies into one, and understand that you are here on this planet because you're here to learn, to grow spiritually, and that you are part of this big play, and none of this is really real. Because when you die, the real part of you, the soul part of you, continues living. That is eternal. So that doesn't die. None of the people that have died in your life are gone.
No.
They're just not in a physical form anymore.
So basically, instead of being body conscious, become more soul conscious.
Definitely. And as you do that, you have to understand what your soul purpose is right now on the planet. And some people are like, well, I don't know, I'm just a bus driver. How does that make me a soul purpose person? I'm like, it's not so much what you do as how you do it, right? Look at Matt Damon, for example. He's an actor. He makes millions of dollars. But that's not his soul-infused work. His soul-infused work is he's using his influence and money to bring water to villages that don't have any. That is his soul-infused work. But he wouldn't be able to have that influence and that power if he wasn't this famous actor in the first place. So sometimes our paid work is just a tool to get us to complete our soul's work. So we don't all have to be spiritual teachers, we don't have to be gurus, but it's what we do with our strength to affect and influence the world around us that makes us soul infused.
And your soul purpose is actually derived from the Akashic Records?
Yes. And if someone is curious about that, one of the techniques we use is the soul reading. And then we make you understand why the things that have happened to you have happened to you, and how are those things helping you grow into becoming this soul-infused being in order to line up with your spiritual purpose.
It's good, I've done it.
And you agree?
Yeah. Anything else? Do we have any questions? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask you, have you heard of the Bosnian pyramid? That they discovered a pyramid in Europe?
Yes.
In Bosnia?
Yes.
And they tried to debunk it and all that stuff, but it's a super cool. Since you like to travel, I thought if you haven't
Bosnia is not a place I've been yet. But I'll give you an example.
Visiting, it's really interesting.
I'll give you an example of how far you have to dig to get to these civilizations. Okay, so I took a group to England. So we're going to all these places, and we went to a place called Bath, and it's really literally a Roman bath. And they had to dig something like 25 feet because they were building some structure, and then they found these baths that are still there, still have hot water running through them, and it's still standing, and just over time got very forgotten, and because the Romans skedaddled out of England when the barbarians took over, and the barbarians wanted nothing to do with anything Roman, so they left that there, and it got buried over time. And that's Roman, and we know the Romans existed, and that's less than 2,000 years ago. So imagine how far deep you have to dig to actually get to the sources that of Lemurian times. You have to go super, super, super deep. The only reason why in Mexico they found it after 30 feet of digging is because it got moved by the cataclysm, and so it was much higher up, right? So it didn't get buried at the same rate. And the other thing too is the mound builders in North America are part of that too. But you have to dig under the mountain. The mounds are sacred, so nobody can dig. And I understand that. But if we were allowed to dig under the mound, you'd find that it's most likely a pyramid hidden under there. And the same thing when I was in Sweden teaching there. I got taken to a Viking burial ground, and they're mounds. There's some, if it's all over the world, and these civilizations, technically, we're not supposed to be speaking at the time, then why are they using the same techniques? Why they were producing the same burial ways? Because one group of people was traveling and telling them they should do it that way. And for some reason, they were believed and followed, so they had to be more advanced and appeared like they knew what they were doing.
The other thing I wanted to say, I just thought of something interesting when you said that the Atlanteans most likely moved to Egypt and the Mayans were most likely more related to Lemuria.
Yes.
If you look at the pyramids.
Yeah, but the Mayan didn't build the pyramids.
No, I mean like the pyramids that you find in those lands.
Yes.
Like the one that goes like,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is like, just take it high. Like even the
But
building.
the pyramid in Cancun were built by Atlanteans.
I'm just saying that even
Yes.
like how
There's a difference.
there's like many more types, but I was just thinking how interesting.
Well,
these
if you go in Peru
Look up
and
that.
you look at the Chinchan ruins, they were building huge communities, and it was amazing. It goes for kilometers upon kilometers of these huge, big communal space that is shared. So it's not a house; it's a communal space, right? We all live together and we all share together. And then the Incas, which came from the other side, so Atlantean influence, were a warlike civilization that invaded and taught them how to do it better. It's amazing. Throughout history, it's happened over and over and over again. And when you start traveling, you have to start traveling as someone who gets to know the culture and the history, as opposed to being just a tourist taking a picture of a cool place. You have to understand what happened here, why did that happen, and is this happening again? And the answer is always going to be, yeah. So when are you going to stop, right? Anybody else? Yes, dear.
What can you say about the resurgence of Lemurian crystals?
Well, we're ready for the, we're ready for the actual language that they speak. We're ready for the information they can deliver and give us. And so we're finally ready to have them and read them. I can read them. I know quite a few people who can as well. So I can actually talk to crystals. Crystals have a consciousness. They are very, very, very old beings that have a soul infused inside the crystal. And they speak, they're loud. Some of them are very loud. Some of them are very powerful, and it's nothing got to do with the size or the perfection of the crystal. It's all got to do with how intact the energy is.
They just kind of speak a lot slower than most kind of telepathic or spiritual.
Any questions on YouTube or Facebook? No? Okay, well, it's 8:38, folks. I thank you very much for being present in the room. And thank you for the podcast, YouTube, Facebook Live people. I love you all, and I'll see you next week for the next one, which is, help me somebody.
Next week.
What's next
Oh,
week?
Fear.
Fear causes your greatest wounds. Very interesting talk. Don't miss it. All right, ciao, people.
On like
Stop it.
the color.
Okay.
We're still live.